I'm Tony Ruiz, contributing editor at Gold Derby, here with Joseph LaCourte, the costume designer for Showtime's Fellow Travelers. And Joseph, I watch this show and I think just from a purely design standpoint, you get to cover 3.5 decades of material, each one so specific. And so when you see an assignment like that, is that exciting? Is that daunting, or a little bit of both?
Obviously, right off the top, it's exciting because we got to cover 4 of the most influential fashion decades decades in fashion, rather, I should say. So of course that was exciting. It is daunting by the sheer mass of costumes that you have to produce for a show like this. But I think in total, if I remember, it was 4,446 costumes total for the principals and the background. But it was, every day was exciting. And we had great leaders in our showrunner and writer, Ron Nicemanner, and Daniel Minahan, and Destiny and James Kent and Uda, who all were directors, and the cast, who was brilliant. And so yeah, it was, I would say on the scale, it was 85% exciting and 15% daunting.
Well, it's interesting because I spoke to Anastasia Mazzaro, who was the production designer, and she talked a great deal about how connected the production design and the costuming was. And I'm just curious, from your perspective, what was that relationship like?
We became best friends very fast. We were constantly in each other's office. I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about using this fabric in this set. And she's like, well, here's a paint chip, or here's a sample of the wallpaper. So there was tons and tons of costumes like that. And we also only used practical lighting on sets. We didn't have any lights anywhere on the set. So it was also complicated to talk to the DP, because we were like, hey, is this going to show up? We had a set called the Cozy Corner, which was a nightclub, which Anastasia was brilliant, and she mirrored all around the nightclub, and the ceiling was metallic and reflective. So there was lots of that conversation so that I could make a game plan for the clothes so they would be featured as best they could.
So does your process start with the characters, or does it start with the set and the location? Where do you begin?
Yeah, so for this project in particular, most projects, is I'll get a script, I'll read it, I'll have a quick brief meeting with the director and the showrunner or the writer, and then I go to work sketching ideas, and then I sketch the ideas out I send the ideas out to the director and the showrunner and the creators, and I'm like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. And fortunately for this project, 85% of what I first initially put out was on the screen. So I was super thrilled about that, especially since it's 4 decades. And then in turn, I get those ideas to the DP and to the hair and makeup people, as well as Anastasia, the production designer. So everyone knows kind of where I'm going to go. But then the other layer is that I also send those sketches out to the actors and set up conversations with them. Hey, this is what I'm thinking about where the character could go. But it's super important to have their input, because they're the one who's actually creating the character. We're helping, but I initially sketched some suits in brown for Hawk, and after a couple of conversations with Matt, we were like, oh, let's stay in cool world for you. Let's do grays and blues. So the actor's input is just as important to me as the director and the showrunner and all that.
Well, and in, we talk about, working with Matt and Jonathan. These are 2 very different characters. These are 2 very different world experiences, world views, and personalities. And so you mentioned kind of the coolness for Hawk. How did you see Tim at the same time?
Well, interestingly, for Hawk and for like Lucy, like 80% of what they wore throughout the 4 decades was built. But it was very important when we came to Tim, who Jonathan Bailey plays, that I wanted to use only vintage clothing that had already had a life, He's from Staten Island. He has no money. He's got one suitcase he moved to Washington with. If you watch the show, you're like, oh, there's that sweater, but it's a different tie, and there's that jacket with different pants. So it was just cobbling the different outfits together from the one suitcase that he had. And I said to Johnny, I was like, hey, listen, we want to use this shirt, but there's only one of them. And in a scene you hear rip, and you're like, oh no. But we sew it together, and you keep going. But I wanted the clothes to already have a life in them, and Johnny felt really good about that. That they have so many stories to tell, so he wanted to add his story to them. So yeah, so that's what, and so he is to create a nice contrast with Hawk. We did browns and tans and deep greens for Tim.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, and it just immediately made me think about how so much of Hawk's and to a certain extent Lucy's experience is about putting up masks and putting up walls, and the clothes themselves are almost like their own costume. It's very meta almost in that sense.
Yeah, we talked a lot, all the actors and I, about how their costumes are in one way a form of armor because they're all hiding secrets. So for Lucy, and since she always is dressed well put together, even though she's falling apart inside, but the same can be said for almost all of the characters. Mary, when she's being interrogated by this, she's still dressed for work and looks prim and proper. She's got her jewels on, her lips done, but she's hiding all those secrets as well. So
is there a time period that had different challenges than the others, that had more severe challenges than the others? I mean, you're covering such a large swath of time.
Yeah, we also wanted to, we also wanted to make sure that we kept a true verisimilitude to all the decades, and it wasn't just, oh, look at these great bell-bottom jeans for the 70s, but we wanted to make sure we did so much research. We looked, I mean, I can't even tell you, especially like for the 50s, we watched old newsreels that they used to show between movies at Radio City, just to see some of the politicos that we have in our story, to see what they really wore, and how when Joe McCarthy walked across a room, how his jacket, he was so disheveled that his jacket would just flap all the time. So we wanted to make sure we figured that out and how it worked best for Chris Bauer. But I guess the biggest challenge of all was bringing true authenticity to the cozy corner in the world of drag back in the 50s, because now Drag Race rules the world, but and they do have their own challenges now they're facing, but back then it was such a different story. It was very undercover, very secretive, and men weren't professional makeup artists, so there was a lot of discussion about how you put the makeup on, but there's still an androgynous feel to it. And so that was probably the most challenging, to make sure we got those moments right.
The Fire Island episode, as soon as I knew I was going to interview you, I knew the first thing I wanted to ask was, where did you get that robe that Matt wears in the Fire Island episode? Because that robe is just sheer perfection.
Yeah, well, we probably looked at close to 50 robes, but that's one. He wears two robes, if I remember correctly. One was from a rental house in Canada, believe it or not, and the other one was an Etsy find online.
Whoa.
Yeah, we had to source from everywhere. Canada is really great, that place to work, but they're limited in how many. It's not like Hollywood, where there's rental house after rental house. So we had to pull from LA, we had to pull from Canada. We had someone constantly researching Etsy and eBay and see what's out there. I'd get an idea in my brain, and I'd be like, this got to still exist somewhere. Let's find it. And yeah, so that one of the robes was an Etsy find.
I know I had asked you previously about which period was the most challenging, but was there a period that was the most fun? The period where you were like, yes, I can't wait to dig in.
Well, honestly, anything in the 40s and the 50s is like a passion for me, but I would have to say I did have a great time with the 70s, because the actors had such a great time wanting to dress up in these clothes from the 70s, the bell bottoms and the tight knit t-shirts, and and then in the contrast, the sadness of Tim later in the 80s, that was also good to play with as well. But yeah, the 70s is a lot of fun. The dancing in Fire Island, all those go-go shorts and cutoffs, and Yeah. So, and we found a lot of things, uh, samples that we saw, and we're like, oh, this is a great cut for you. But we ended up making a lot of it in the right color palette because you know how it is. You got 9 characters in a scene, and you're trying to make sure no one looks alike, so you have to switch the color on this one and that one. But yeah, I think the '70s was a lot of fun, and I have some great blackmail photos of the cast in short shorts. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. But we had took a lot of good fun fitting photos that make me laugh still.
It's so interesting. I feel like this series is so important right now, because of conversations that are happening, within and about the queer community right now. To see that the struggle has never really ended, because you encountering 35 years of queer history. I feel like this series has an importance and a relevance, even though it's about times that have already passed. Do you see it kind of the same way?
Yeah, absolutely. Many of the challenges back then are still being, threatened today. I mean, back in the '50s, it's different now, but back in the '50s, even if there was a gay or lesbian person in your bar, you were considered disorderly, and they could shut you down. In the fight and the struggle, through the AIDS epidemic, just to get government funding and approval. I mean, we're still fighting some of these things, and now it's, the same thing, but it's trans rights now, in medical care for trans people. So it may it may waver to a different sector of the LGBTQ plus community, but it's still the same fight for all of us.
And stretching as far as like what we allow kids to read, because you put a
Correct.
queer character in a book and people lose their minds.
Yeah. 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 You're 100% right.
It's almost like a
Uh,
second McCarthy era. It's almost like the
it's
shadow of McCarthy is hanging over us.
it's really crazy, and in so many politicians nowadays want to move us back. They like the way it used to be. So, we have to struggle to get out of it again. So, yeah, you're right.
I did want to ask, because Daniel Minahan is such a great director, and this, I feel like, is the perfect vehicle for him. It mixes all the things of like with fashion and drama, and so what did he bring to this project that made him the right person for this?
Well, in my eyes, I had been a fan of other things he has done. So when I found out he was on board to do it, I was like excited just for that. So many of my friends worked on Halston and raved about what an amazing director he was, that I was so excited. But first of all, Dan is the nicest human, A, but B, he has an impeccable sense of style in himself. So when we're talking about silhouettes, like some people get cast, you sketch one thing for a character, but then someone else gets cast, and you're like, okay, so this is not the vision of the person that I was envisioning was going to look like. So Dan and I will talk and be like, hey, this, how do you want to make this so it's saying the right message for you? And he always had, let's cinch in the waist, let's make it looser. He is so smart about it all. And he's like, we can light this, don't worry about putting her in darker clothes, because the way I'm going to have it lit, it's going to cast a shadow up onto her, bounce a shadow onto her face. It'll be great. So it was so easy with Dan, because he was such a captain of the ship, and always had, even with Anastasia and hair and makeup, hey, how about we just pump up her lip just a little bit redder, because the way I'm going to light it, it's going to glow more. And he's just a genius.
Well, Joseph, congratulations on such a great series. Everybody go to goldderby.com, make your predictions for the upcoming award season, and stay tuned for interviews with more contenders in the coming weeks. Joseph LaCourte from Fellow Travelers, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Have a great day.